kingdom of France is crumbling under the weight of a nation embroiled in conflict amongst itself, beset by the actions of an ignorant ruler gone mad. Once vibrant boulevards now resemble scenes from a nightmare, with rubble-strewn pathways and buildings reduced to mere husks of their former grandeur. The air is thick with smoke, with the mournful wails of the wounded and the clanking of mechanized footsteps echoing through the chaos. Amidst the ruins, metal monsters stalk the streets with an air of ruthless efficiency. Their cold frames gleam menacingly in the light as they patrol the war-torn cityscape, impervious to the cries of the anguish that surround them. They are the silent enforcers of a tyrannical regime, crushing dissent and rebellion beneath their relentless advance. But even amidst the devastation and despair, the spirit of resistance burns bright in the heart of the people of Paris. Armed with little more than their courage and determination, they stand resistant against the forces of oppression. Their voices raised in a chorus of defiance that reverberates through the shattered streets. Barricades of overturned carts and makeshift fortifications line the avenues, now manned by the fallen souls who refuse to surrender to the machines that threaten to destroy them. As the conflict rages on, the fate of France hangs in the balance, its streets awash with the blood of patriots and tyrants alike. But amidst the chaos and carnage is a beacon of light in the gathering storm. For in the crucible of revolution, the seeds of change are sown, and the promise of a new dawn sits on the horizon. This revolution, a great mechanical revolution, saw its beginning and its end with Louis, the 16th of his name, the Clockwork King. For too long, the people of France have been neglected by the ruling party. For too long have they suffered and starved, waiting for salvation from a monarchy that seeks only to better themselves, at the expense of the people they are meant to serve. The embarrassment of the loss in the 7 Years' War still lingers. The nation gave all it could to defeat the British across the Atlantic, draining its coffers and accruing an impossibly colossal debt in the process. In times of such trouble, France needed a change following the passing of Louis XV. It needed a king who could carry the world on his shoulders. The realm never received such a leader. Instead, through succession, it received exactly what it didn't need. France found itself in another war overseas, aiding the American rebels in an attempt to atone for the loss of the 7 Years' War. All the while, the foundations of life withered away at home. The climate was worsening. Harvests were failing. The price of bread was increasing. Despite the impending disaster, the crown continued to pursue its own passions that only drove the kingdom further into an economic abyss. At the heart of the storm stood King Louis XVI, a monarch ill-equipped to navigate the treacherous waters of governance. Hesitant and indecisive, Louis faltered in the face of mounting challenges. His reluctance to assert his authority only served to deepen the nation's woes. Yet amidst the chaos and uncertainty, the king found solace in his obsession with clockwork and machinery that he believed held the key to France's salvation. Louis was never interested in taking up his responsibilities as the heir to the Bourbon dynasty. Long before his coronation, his interest lied solely in pursuing clockwork and mechanical engineering, often ignoring his duties in favor of studying in solitude to perfect his craft. When Louis inherited the throne from his grandfather, the 15th of his name, his priorities never shifted as the weight of a kingdom shifted to his shoulders. Instead, with his newfound power and influence, Louis's vision of building a mechanical corps of servants for use amongst his subjects came ever closer to becoming a reality. The young king wasn't alone in these endeavors. Long before Louis assumed the French throne, a mechanical inventor by the name of Jacques de Vaucanson broke ground with his machine tooling innovations that contributed to the ignition of the Industrial Revolution. While he gained renown for his practical mechanical inventions, Jacques found his interest pivoting towards using his expertise to develop machines that mimicked biological functions. Initially, Vaucanson's inventions were seen as nothing more than trinkets, toys to entertain children. It wasn't until the inventor attracted the attention of the French nobility that his inventions developed into infinitely more complex machines. However, this attention was a double-edged sword. With it came disgust, resulting in the destruction of his workshop by those who deemed his work profane. Jacques grew weary of the negative attention and later passed the torch to his nephew, a boy orphaned at the age of 10 who immediately became the inventor's pupil. Eugène de Vaucanson. He worked under his uncle for many years, and when given the chance to pursue his own creations, he quickly showed that he had far surpassed Jacques' talents. Eugène elevated his uncle's work to astronomical heights with brand new methods and ever more complex systems contributing to the rapid acceleration of automaton theory. Naturally, the clockwork king, Louis XVI, found great interest in Eugène's new approach, and thus he sought to recruit the young Vaucanson into his service and appoint him as the leader of the great mechanical revolution that he so desperately wanted to start. With these new responsibilities, Vaucanson was endowed with a new workshop in the Invalides complex of Paris, and effectively unlimited resources, as King Louis wanted to use the technology of automata to serve his subjects and show the world that there was true value in these machines. Within a few years, Vaucanson's machines flooded the streets of Paris and became an integral piece of everyday life within the city. No longer were automats confined to showrooms and dinner parties. They became a tool to replace the working man, as Vaucanson's earliest practical models served as messengers and transporters to move goods and facilitate communication across the city. These were soon followed by gardeners, kitchen staff for the nobility, palace guards, church acolytes, and models made specifically to facilitate the automatic repair of their fellow machines. The laborer class showed the true industrial power that these inventions could provide, as they managed to take over jobs requiring manual labor with extreme efficiency, as they felled forests, dug mines, and forged metals effortlessly. Aside from the winding of a machine's internal clock and a bit of oil, they never tire. What warriors they would make. A thought that had evidently crossed the minds of Eugène and his king, as the French army was in the early stages of being outfitted with mechanical soldiers. Built as infantry, siege weaponry, and specialists, the military was soon to be sharing a battlefield with a nearly invincible ally. In order to catapult the Kingdom of France to technological heights one might have thought impossible, the ventures of Louis and Eugène de Vaucanson were a resounding success. But to the people of France who have fallen into and remained in abject poverty for years, the pursuit of these highly expensive machines and the material they demanded to build, maintain, and improve proved to be a backhanded slap to the face. The vision of these machines were sold to the populace as a way to improve their quality of life, but the root cause of the economic issues the realm was facing had gone completely unaddressed. The king and his noble subjects continued to live lavish lifestyles in stark contrast to that of the average citizen, all the while shoveling the last remnants of the kingdom's finances into the American Revolution raging overseas and this great mechanical revolution that Louis sought to incite. And as such, he paid little attention to the plights of his people. It wasn't until the sudden death of Louis's 11-month-old daughter that he truly began to detach from his duties. Faced with the certainty of economic collapse, France officially declared bankruptcy. After much berating from the financial minister, Jacques Necker, Louis reluctantly called for the assembly of the Estates General in the Palace of Versailles to address the economic situation. The Estates General was an assembly comprised of the three distinct estates that represented a portion of the realm: the nobility, the clergy, and the commoners. The Assembly of 1789 was the first time the estates reconvened in the last 175 years, revealing how desperate the problem was. Despite the desperation that one of the three estates in particular faced, the commoners, while making up the vast majority of the assembly, only held a minuscule portion of the vote. Nevertheless, the convention opened with the immediate address of the economic instability and subsequent taxation proposals in order to course correct. The writing was on the wall. While the nobility and the clergy were content with their overspending and automat-assisted lifestyles, the commoners had been suffering against the effects of poverty and bankruptcy for years. This was their moment to air the grievances that they felt had been long ignored. Louis and his ministers made a concerted effort to ignore the issue of the Third Estate's unequal representation, as they had been suggesting to level the playing field by giving each of the three estates equal voting power. Minister Necker understood their concerns, but the following actions of the First Estate proved that they had misjudged the situation. The assembly hit dead end after dead end, as the estates could agree on nothing. The deadlock reached its zenith when the representatives of the Third Estate, frustrated by the stubbornness of the clergy and nobility, declared themselves the National Assembly, a sovereign body representing the will of the people. This declaration was met with resistance from the king and the privileged estates, who viewed it as an affront to their authority. Though undeterred, the National Assembly found themselves locked out of their usual meeting hall on June 20th, 1789. In a moment of improvisation and defiance, they gathered in a nearby tennis court. It was here that they took the historic tennis court oath, vowing not to disband until they had drafted a constitution for France. This oath symbolized their unity and determination, a collective pledge to stand against tyranny and demand justice for the common people. The tennis court oath marked the beginning of a new chapter in French history, one where the will of the people would no longer be suppressed. The Assembly's relentless pursuit of justice and equality set the stage for the downfall of the monarchy and the hopeful rise of a French republic. A month into the convention, Louis, already suffering from the grief of losing his daughter prior, then lost his eldest son. For King Louis, the loss of his beloved son was a blow beyond measure. The prince had been the monarch's last flicker of hope amidst the rising tide of political turmoil and personal grief. As the light of his son's life extinguished, so too did the king's capacity to lead. Consumed by an all-encompassing despair, Louis retreated from the world, his mind spiraling into a dark abyss where the cries of his departed children echoed endlessly. The Estates General, once a beacon of potential reform and salvation for a crumbling France, became an unbearable reminder of his failures. Louis, plagued by his grief and overwhelmed by the enormity of his kingdom's problems, could no longer face the Assembly's demands. In a moment of utter desperation and detachment, Louis abruptly ended the Estates General. His decree was swift and absolute. All those who opposed him and his rule were to be declared outlaws. This decision sent shockwaves through Paris, transforming the simmering discontent into a boiling cauldron of fear and anger. The king, once perceived as a distant and detached ruler, now emerged as a figure of cold, unyielding tyranny. The nation's arsenal of automats, previously celebrated as the epitome of French ingenuity, was now completely repurposed to enforce the king's ruthless edict. These soulless automata, engineered with precision and devoid of mercy, were unleashed upon the city with a singular mission: to arrest the ringleaders of the National Assembly. To further cement his control, Louis issued a draconian edict ordering all Parisians to remain indoors until the arrests were completed. The streets of Paris fell into an eerie silence. Any sign of disobedience, any flicker of resistance, was met with the swift and brutal action by the mechanical enforcers, their gears and pistons a terrifying testament to the king's resolve. The city, once alive with the spirit of change, now lay under a pall of fear. The Parisians, confined to their homes, listened with bated breath as the automata carried out their grim tasks. The clang of metal against cobblestone, the distant cries of those taken away, and the pervasive sense of dread became the new reality for a people who had dared to dream of liberty and justice. The arrest of the National Assembly leaders marked a turning point in the revolution. With these key figures silenced, Louis believed he could quell the unrest festering within his kingdom. Yet the suppression of influential voices only served to ignite the revolutionary fervor. The following dismissal of Jacques Necker, the financial minister whose attempts at reform had been a beacon of hope for the commoners, was the final straw. Necker's departure symbolized the monarchy's complete disregard for the people's suffering and cemented the perception of an autocratic regime deaf to the cries for justice and reform. In a bid to consolidate his power and reassert control, Louis undertook a complete reconstruction of the ministry. He surrounded himself with sycophants and yes-men, advisors who would not challenge his authority or question his increasingly erratic decisions. These new ministers, more interested in preserving their own status and wealth than addressing the kingdom's crises, further alienated the populace. The king's obsession with his mechanical army grew, as he relied more heavily on these automata to enforce his decrees and maintain order. Paris soon erupted into chaos. The commoners, driven to desperation by years of economic hardship and the king's blatant disregard for their plight, began to mobilize. Rumors of hoarded weapons and ammunition at the Invalides spread like wildfire. On July 13, 1789, the citizens of Paris, armed with whatever they could find, stormed the Invalides. The complex, lightly guarded by a contingent of the king's automata, became the grounds of a skirmish. The clashing metal and the battle cries of the revolutionaries echoed through the streets as the citizens fought to seize the weapons stored within. The Invalides fell, and the people armed themselves with muskets and cannons stored within its walls. However, the victory at the Invalides was but a prelude to a far more symbolic and decisive confrontation. The revolutionaries, now emboldened and better equipped, set their sights on the Bastille, the ancient fortress prison that had come to symbolize the tyranny and oppression of the Bourbon monarchy. On the morning of July 14th, 1789, a tense and determined crowd gathered outside the gates of the Bastille. The fortress, with its thick stone walls and formidable defenses, was a daunting target. Yet the revolutionaries were undeterred. Among them were not only commoners, but also disillusioned members of the middle class and defectors from the king's own army. The collective rage and desperation of a city pushed to its breaking point fueled their courage. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the first shots rang out. The defenders of the Bastille, a mix of royal soldiers and automata, responded with musket fire. The machines, designed for combat and unwavering in their duty, proved to be formidable adversaries. Their precision and strength, which had once been seen as marvels of engineering, now instilled fear and anger in the hearts of the revolutionaries. The battle for the Bastille was fierce and bloody, with the automata's mechanical limbs crushing bones and their retrofitted ranged weapons cutting down revolutionaries with cold efficiency. However, the spirit of revolution could not be quenched. The citizens of Paris, driven by their desire for liberty and justice, fought with a ferocity born of desperation. They used their captured cannons to bombard the fortress walls, and their sheer numbers began to turn the tide. As the afternoon wore on, the defenders of the Bastille were overwhelmed. The gates were breached, and the revolutionaries poured into the fortress. However, inside, they encountered wave after wave of relentless automats. The revolutionaries, armed with their muskets and swords and the sheer force of their will, fought back heroically. Each clash of metal and flesh was a testament to their courage, as they aimed to dismantle the king's unfeeling enforcers. Despite their bravery, the automats' unyielding assault took a heavy toll. Realizing the dire situation, the revolutionaries seized control of the Bastille's battlement cannons. From atop the fortress walls, they ordered the cannons to fire upon the mechanical adversaries, hoping to turn the tide of battle. Explosions rocked the fortress as cannonballs tore through the ranks of automats, sending shards of metal and gears flying in every direction. Yet the automats were too many and too resilient. With each wave destroyed, another surged forward, their numbers seemingly endless. The fortress became a battleground of despair. The revolutionaries, exhausted and outnumbered, continued to fight valiantly, but the relentless advance of the machines was unstoppable. As the battle dragged on, it became clear that there would be no victory. The revolutionaries, despite their courage and determination, were overwhelmed. The automats, continuing to follow their programmed orders, cut down every last defender of the people's cause. The once hopeful and defiant spirit of the revolutionaries was extinguished in the blood-soaked courtyard of the Bastille, as the last remnants of the revolutionaries in the square ordered their compatriots to fire upon them and escape while they could. When the dust settled, the Bastille was a graveyard of twisted metal and broken bodies. The revolutionaries lay dead in silence, their sacrifice marking a tragic chapter in the struggle for freedom. The automats, undeterred by the carnage, stood vigilant. The fortress, symbolically and strategically important, was reclaimed by the king's forces. Louis, informed of the victory, felt a hollow sense of triumph. His machines had succeeded where human soldiers might have faltered, yet the cost was immeasurable. The reclaiming of the Bastille was not just a victory for the monarchy, but a stark reminder of the lengths to which he would go to maintain his rule. The streets of Paris, once filled with the hope of change, now echoed with the somber realization of the king's unyielding grip. In a grim decree, Louis ordered his royal mechanical army to continue their campaign of suppression. The defeat at the Bastille was a blow to the revolutionary spirit, but it was not the end. The automats, now seen equally to Louis as symbols of tyranny and oppression, patrolled the streets, enforcing curfews and arresting anyone suspected of dissent. Parisians watched in silence as the king's mechanical enforcers roamed their city, casting a long shadow over the now near nascent revolution. The failure at the Bastille, rather than crushing the revolutionary spirit, served to deepen the resolve of those who yearned for freedom. The stories of heroism and sacrifice within the fortress walls spread, igniting a fire in the hearts of many who had yet to take a stand. As Louis tightened his grip, the seeds of rebellion continued to grow. Nourished by the blood of martyrs and the unquenchable desire for liberty, the revolution was far from over, and the fight for a new France, where the will of the people could no longer be ignored, pressed on with renewed vigor. With the revolution momentarily suppressed, Louis turned his focus to a more personal, more insidious enemy: death. The passing of his beloved son, Louis Joseph, had plunged the king into a chasm of despair, igniting an obsessive pursuit to conquer mortality itself. This was no longer merely about maintaining his rule, it was about defying the very force that had torn his family apart. To this end, Louis sought the expertise of Alessandro de Cagliostro, an enigmatic figure shrouded in mystery and whispered rumors of dark magic. De Cagliostro was a master of alchemical practices and the forbidden arts, and Louis believed he held the key to unlocking the secrets of life and death. With the king's full patronage, de Cagliostro was commissioned to infuse the Royal Mechanical Army with a new life, removing the barrier of needing to manually wind each automat, transforming them from mere automatons into almost sentient beings powered by the essence of human souls. The Bastille, soaking in a mix of blood and oil, now became a crucible for dark experimentation. The essence of the revolutionaries who had fallen within its blood-soaked walls was harvested, their spirits ensnared by de Cagliostro's arcane rituals. The very people who had fought valiantly for freedom were now the lifeblood of the king's mechanical enforcers, a grim irony that underscored the depths of Louis's desperation and madness. Each mechanical soldier, once a lifeless construct of gears and metal, now pulsed with the stolen essence of the fallen. These essence-infused automats moved with an unsettling awareness, their newfound vitality a testament to de Cagliostro's malevolent genius. The streets of Paris, already haunted by the specter of the failed revolution, were now patrolled by these unholy sentinels. Meanwhile, the leaders of the opposition, the fiery voices that had once rallied the Third Estate and dared to challenge the throne, began to vanish without a trace. Whispers of clandestine abductions and secret executions spread through the city, fueling a climate of fear and paranoia. In tandem with these disappearances, monstrous steel titans began to appear across Paris. These colossal machines, far more formidable than the standard automats, were the pinnacle of Vaucanson and de Cagliostro's combined efforts. Each titan was a towering amalgamation of intricate engineering, dark sorcery, imbued with an insatiable drive to enforce the king's will. As Louis's grip tightened, the true horror of his reign became apparent. The once vibrant heart of Paris now beat under the cloak of an unnatural order, where the dead powered the inanimate, and the line between man and machine was blurred. The essence of fallen revolutionaries powered by the very forces that had crushed their efforts, a cycle of oppression and resistance twisted into a grotesque parody by de Cagliostro's dark magic. In this new order, Louis saw himself as the master of life and death, a ruler who could bend the very fabric of existence to his will. Yet, in his quest to conquer mortality, he had forsaken his humanity, becoming a tyrant whose legacy would be written in blood and steel. The ghostly mechanical army, the atrocity at the Bastille, and the Titans, all were manifestations of a kingdom that had lost its way, driven by a king who could no longer distinguish between salvation and damnation. Thus, Paris stood transformed. A city where the cries for liberty had been silenced by the frictional roars of mechanical abominations, and where the dream of the revolution had been consumed by the darkest depths of one man's grief and ambition. In the aftermath of the storming of the Bastille, Paris resembled a landscape torn from the depths of an industrial hell. The fires of the revolution have since propagated across the city. As revolutionaries continue to fight valiantly against the machines, their voices, even still, whisper in defiance, even as they continued to fall to the undying will of Louis's mechanical army. But not far away, locked in the confines of the palace of Saint-Cloud, was Marie Antoinette, Louis's very own Queen of France. Languished in ignorance and fear, cut off from the outside world by her own husband, she remained unaware of the horrors unfolding beyond the palace walls, as she was left only to watch the smoke billow into the sky on the horizon. Yet Marie's own actions had contributed to the unrest that led to that fateful assembly of the Estates General. Her careless, lavish lifestyle had long been a source of resentment among the French citizens, who saw her extravagance as a cruel mockery of their own struggles. Surely they'll come for her, but the chateau guards were nowhere to be found. Instead, the Royal Mechanical Army wandered every inch of the palace's exterior grounds, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. However, only one was left inside. This single automat was one of Eugène de Vaucanson's greatest accomplishments, in perhaps more ways than one. It was a dancer, built to entertain the nobility. In some ways, this dancer was much like the rest of the leisure automats, needlessly convoluted. Her name was Aegis, and she was the most complex machine that had ever set foot outside of Vaucanson's workshop. But her mechanical complexity was not the whole story, for she possessed a fervent sense of loyalty, the ability to speak, and the ability to think. Following the events at the Bastille, King Louis had repurposed Aegis to serve Queen Marie as her bodyguard, thinking that her sophistication would prove a formidable obstacle for any who sought out the Queen. Marie, wallowing in a sense of utter dread, turned to Aegis in order to seek answers about the calamities engulfing Paris beyond the palace walls, for she was her only hope. The Queen needed answers. As Paris burned in the distance, the gravity of this situation was soon revealed to this naive mechanical bodyguard. Aegis's mission was clear, yet perilous. She needed to find Eugène de Vaucanson, the brilliant creator of the king's mechanical army, and unravel the mysteries surrounding the death of Marie Antoinette's son. This journey was not merely a quest for truth, but a pivotal endeavor that would reignite the spark of the revolution. By uncovering Vaucanson's secrets and rallying the revolutionaries, Aegis had the potential to turn the tide against the oppressive regime and restore hope to a city engulfed in despair. Her mission soon became a beacon of light, a call to arms that could unify the fractured voices of the revolution and inspire them to reclaim their beloved city, for the entire kingdom was at stake.